And joining us today are from Fashion Service Network, which was built in response to the fashion industry's overwhelming need for innovation and multidisciplinary approaches. In 2002, 20 of New York's leading service providers formed Fashion Service Network, a group of select, experienced, and seasoned professionals delivering solutions and opportunities to the industry. It is the goal of the Fashion Service Network to assist fashion companies seeking to expand, strengthen, and energize their business. To accomplish this, FSN reaches beyond traditional resources and provides an all-encompassing service source for the fashion industry. The group contains leaders in all professional service areas. The FSN meets regularly, exchanges information, communicates ideas, and discusses needs and opportunities. Interaction of FSN members has resulted in many business opportunities for their respective clients. FSN is truly a visionary resource that explores and implements new strategies and business practices for the fashion industry. And we have three people on stage today. Kathleen unfortunately wasn't able to join us, although she is a professor here in graduate studies for the MFA program, so she is a resource that exists to all of us on a daily basis if you should want to hear more about her or from her. But we have joining us today Andy Jassin, who is co-founder and managing director of Jassin Consulting Group. Andrew is co-founder and managing director of the Jassin Consulting Group, a management consulting firm providing strategy, development, and implementation services exclusively to the fiber, textile, apparel, and home furnishings industries and related supply chain companies. In 1989, he formed the Marketing Management Group, MMG, a consulting firm which helped fashion and retail businesses function effectively and provided independent expert counsel to top management on issues related to brand management, licensing, marketing, and product evaluation. Mr. Jassin became one of the most influential and respected advisors in the fashion industry. He distinguishes himself with a hands-on personal approach, guiding his clients successfully through issues related to management, merchandising, production, and international marketing, specializing in licensing and distribution and strategic partnerships. Mr. Jassin has had a highly successful 20-year career in the apparel industry as president and chief executive officer of several operating divisions of Jones Apparel Group, a major apparel conglomerate. Mr. Jassin started Karl Lagerfeld, a division of Bitterman Industries, U.S. France, pioneering a worldwide licensing manufacturing organization for this top European designer. Prior to Jones Apparel Group, Mr. Jassin was principal and president of FU's USA, an international jeanswear company with a global licensing and retail presence, which was sold to a major U.S. retailer. Mr. Jassin is an expert in matters of litigation and arbitration in state and federal court, as well as serving on the board of directors for Fashion Service Network. Next, we have Michael Stanley, who is managing director and head of factoring division. I'm doing this a little bit out of order, but Michael's closer to me. Rosenthal & Rosenthal is the leading independent factoring, asset-based lending and purchase order financing firm in the United States. Founded in 1938, by Imre J. Rosenthal, the firm is now led by the second and third generations of the Rosenthal family. As a privately held company, Rosenthal is committed to providing personalized service and flexible lending to clients across a broad range of industries. Rosenthal has offices in New York, California, Georgia, and North Carolina. Michael serves as a director and board member at FIT, a SUNY institution, and is the chairman of their finance committee. He is a member of the Big Brothers and Big Sisters of New York City Board of Trustees and was previously honored at their 16th annual Accountants and Bankers reception in May 2013. Michael also serves on the Commercial Finance Association's executive committee and holds an MBA in finance from Adelphi University. And last but not least, in our furthest away chair here, Andrew Rotundi, who's Chief Operations and Technology Officer at Dynamic Worldwide. In his 30 years at Dynamic, Andrew has led the development of Dynamic's third-party distribution and IT services businesses. He continues to work directly with the nation's leading retailers and vendors on their best practices in supply chain logistics. Prior to joining Dynamic, Andrew started his career in the computer industries developing and implementing distribution systems. Andrew is a current board member of the FSN Network, Fashion Service Network, the Gambino Medical and Science Foundation, which supports the Cohen's Children Medical Center of New York, and Andrew has served as a mentor at FIT and holds a Bachelor of Science in Accounting from the City University of New York. Thank you all for being here. So I'm showing my 9 months pregnant here with how hard I'm breathing after reading your guys' robust and impressive bios. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Professor Gordon. Am I on? Can you hear me?
Can you flick it up? It's up. Shoot. Oh, that's better.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Professor Gordon, for allowing us to be here. Faces and places in fashion has been a very important part of our careers because we've been doing this for the last 10 years. Today, specifically, we're going to talk about something that I think is important to all of you, as well as ourselves, and that's you are the brand. Now, what's very important is that we spend the first parts of our life learning things, the next part of our lives trying to use those things, and the last part of our life trying to make a living or making a difference. And making a difference is very important. And being here at FIT, it's allowed you to see a lot of different things. But let me sort of step back and introduce two of my friends, and Caroline Gordon, who's also a friend. We'll tell you a little bit about our careers other than the biographies. Each of us have taken a slightly different route which intersect in helping fashion companies exist, make a difference, and survive. And that's about finance, it's about education and design, it's about logistics, and it's about organization. So let me introduce Andrew Hunt to talk a little bit about what he does and how we can be of assistance to all of you.
Thank you, Andy. Can everybody hear me okay? Pleasure to be here. I've had the opportunity to sit in this chair at a number of different sessions through the years. And I always look forward to the feedback that and questions that you'll have for us. My career started in the IT business and wound up in the fashion logistics business, honestly, by accident. I was fortunate enough to marry my wife, Mary, whose family was in the garment trucking business in New York for 20 years. And they asked me to come in on a project of automating some of their trucking business, and they wouldn't let me leave. So I got an offer that I couldn't refuse, and I couldn't be happier. Our logistics business, as you have found out over the last couple of years with COVID and supply chain, has become such a critical piece of the fashion logistics of the entire world. It's affected everybody in this room and affected everybody in the world. We, as a company, have adapted through the advent of e-com, through the advent of shortages of fabric and shortages of labor, and continue to survive and adapt. And I think that's one takeaway that you will all find in your careers, is that it's ever changing. And it's changing at an extremely, I guess at an increasingly rapid pace. What we've seen in terms of new designers and new products was kind of at a standstill up until a couple of years ago, and we're now finally seeing opportunities for young new companies coming up, because many of the quote-unquote old dogs have not survived during COVID. And I think that's going to be a great opportunity for everyone in this room, especially as you are design students or have businesses or work in the industry. We do see some very bright spots going forward. And obviously, having a good education behind you is critical to success.
Mike Stanley has been a cornerstone of most of the companies, or many of the companies in the fashion zone, apparel and footwear, eyewear, home furnishings, in priming their pump and keeping them running financially. Mike?
Indy, thank you for that very handsome introduction. The unique thing about my career is that I had the very rare and unique ability to see inside a lot of different fashion companies. Prior and existing clients of Rosenthal have been Steve Madden, Michael Kors, Seven Jeans, Donald Pliner, Rebecca Minkoff. And the unique thing about my position was that I was able to see inside really what made these companies either successful or not, and the lifespan of these companies, and how they were able to accomplish their goals, what made them work, what made them fail, and it's been a lot of fun, and I was able to witness so many different successes and unfortunately so many different failures of companies, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for being here.
And we're going to put Professor Gordon, we're going to call her Caroline now, on the spot. Tell us about your career. How'd you wind up as a professor?
Well, they've already heard my whole story a couple, probably too many times by now. But I started in a training program at Linens and Things, and then I moved over to fashion bedding at Linens and Things, and then eventually made this swap over to apparel, where I started in women's wear at Ann Taylor. I was there for a bit, and then this was right at the very rapid rise of the internet. So that was growing really rapidly. I got recruited to go over to Ralph Lauren and spent almost a decade there, where I switched from buying over to sales and realized that the skill set is very similar, whether you are pushing the product to buyers or you're pushing the product to customers. The end result is the same thing. You want to pick things that sell, that the customer wants and makes more money for your company. And then I went to G3 Apparel and was there for a little while, at which point I had my first daughter and thought, hey, I'm going to give a go at children's wear. And so I had a couple of years in children's wear, which is a very different animal. But again, the skill set is very transferable between the different industries. So I found myself here a few years back, and on top of teaching this course, I also teach in the business school. So I teach some courses over there in merchandising and buying and math and all that fun stuff, forecasting. But it's really fun taking the knowledge that I learned throughout the industry, over 15 plus years, and learning how to teach it instead, and try to get the information out there in a different way. So.
What's very interesting for all of us and members of Fashion Service Network, we don't begin and end our careers in the same place. We collect information, we collect people, which is something we'll talk about in a bit, and build ourselves into a place where we become a valuable entity to other people as well as ourselves. That's called building a career. And building a career is a very, very important thing in the fashion business. But all of you have a little bit of a leg up on everybody, because here at FIT you've been exposed to a lot of different courses, a lot of different people that are involved in the business school, in design, people doing jewelry or fragrance or kids' furnitures or even toys. But what's most important is the ability to understand where you are, how to communicate what you do, and also how to build upon that to get to the next place. One of the most important things that I've learned in my career, and my career has spanned a long time, is I started in one area and wound up running a company because I collected the ability to understand the numbers and the product and the people and where it would go, the demographics of the marketplace, which is changing. But there was one thing that's most important that exists through all of fashion and exists through what Michael does and what Andrew does and all our clients. You need a great product. That great product, whether you're selling Target or Bergdorf Goodman, it has to be a great product. You also need a great story. Now, that's a little different today than before, because telling stories, we used to use storytellers like advertising. Today, you live in the electronic world of looking at social media, which helps tell the story. So I think it's important as you build your brand to think of certain things that you have to do. Michael, what do you think the most important things that people have to do in learning and starting a career?
Well, I think the most important thing is to follow your skill set, not your passion. Because I think if you follow what your skills are, you'll ultimately become successful. I think that's, in today's environment, I think particularly coming out of undergraduate is to get in with presumably a very large, well-established company. It gives you the opportunity, if you don't like merchandising, design, I think I'd rather work in the logistics department, or I'd like to work in the finance department. I'd like to work in the sourcing department. It gives you that opportunity. If that doesn't happen, I think another fantastic channel is to work for a startup. Most startups, the preponderance of startups don't make it. But I think that having the experience of working in a startup and having that energy and that uniqueness and the ability to vacillate with, like you're going to do different functions in a startup, I think is invaluable. And I think that's typically my suggestion as far as that.
I definitely agree with you. Especially what you will learn in working for a startup. A couple of things. One is you have to work harder than everybody else. Two, to try and pitch yourself to a mentor or a rising star to learn. Because every day, even as old as we are, we're learning every day. And we learn from each other. And we learn from our customers, and we learn from our coworkers, and we learn from me as an employer, learning from the employees. And I think that's absolutely critical. And in any position that you're in any job function that you're doing, you want to do it obviously to the best of your ability. But I think it's also important if you ever have the opportunity to do what you love, but also love what you do. There's no better combination if you can find that. As Michael said, whether you're a designer in whatever function that you're in.
One important ingredient, which I'm sure you've been exposed to, is technology. We're about to see a breakthrough into the metaverse by fashion companies. I've recently attended a fashion presentation, which was completely, for me, in outer space, where a designer using artificial intelligence, virtual reality, was able to put together a fashion show using stuff that was unimaginable 5 years ago. And that's an advantage that all of you have compared to a lot of people that have been in the workplace. It's the understanding of what the technology is and how to adapt it into what you do, whether you're a design student or whether you're going to go into sales, which is a great area to start, or go into logistics, or wind up going into your career beyond fashion. It's very important to be able to embrace it and understand how technology will affect every parts of your, not just jobs, but your lives. One of the things that's interesting that Professor Gordon talked about is connecting the dots between design, production, and retailing. I think that's an important aspect for everyone to understand, that those three legs of the stool work together.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think, as you know, most of the people in the room in here are designers. So I think that they certainly relate very closely with the speakers that we have that come in that are designers. But I've tried to stress throughout the semester, hopefully it's gotten through a little bit, about how important it is to understand how these other roles work and how you as a designer can be better working well with these departments, or, if you're going to be running your own company, helping to understand how they work so you can make them flow. But
How many of you have jobs already?
Ooh, good
Or-
amount of hands. Good question.
And how many of you want to be designers? Michael, why don't you talk about what happens when people start thinking about being a designer? What should their route be, and how do they begin working for a company?
Well, I think that just to step back, I think that Andy, you touched upon education. I think education is really a lifelong pursuit in whatever your endeavor is, and I think that it can be transformative if you let it. But also, once you're out in the work world or any world, I think you're going to attain success through the help and the agency of others, and meeting people, talking to people, sharing ideas, and humans invariably will help you. They'll help other humans, and I think having relationships is crucial to your success and really to your happiness. Unfortunately, the last 3 years now, we've been in, this pandemic. It's amazing, and now, hopefully we're at the tail end, and I think it's been very, very traumatic for all of us because we're a human species, and we're supposed to be around other humans, and I think humans again will help you, and again, it's really through the agency of others to be successful.
One of the challenges that I think we all see, and I'm sure you're going to feel, is that the world of fashion is shrinking to some degree, but it doesn't mean there's less product being made or less being distributed. It's how it's changing. Andrew, you want to talk about private label and brands and some of the things you do in your capacity?
So we have, as a company, kind of a unique perspective. We do a fair amount of e-com fulfillment for national brands and brands, some brands that you never heard of that may have their own website. But the largest part of our business is the fulfillment and the distribution at a retail level for stores like Macy's, Bloomingdale's, Backstage, which is their discount, Saks, which is now split into 3 different companies, and we are also doing work for many of the discounters. I have some personal experience. My daughter happens to be a buyer for Ross, so I have a unique kind of insight to what their business is. And if you've looked at the last couple of years with COVID, the discounters have done phenomenal, and many of the brick and mortar quote-unquote retailers have really struggled. Well, it's interesting because now as consumers are starting to get outside, and we've seen a significant trend to going back to stores, and some of these discounters business has really gone down. Now, part of that may be for economic reasons because there's less money to lower income families, but it also is increasing that brands now at certain price levels are becoming very important. And stores, which typically had their own labels or private labels, are now also searching for new brands, new opportunities. From a design standpoint, that's a critical opportunity for all of you folks to take the skill set that you have, and that skill set to a great extent also has to do with your ability to handle the digital software that's out there for design, and there are a number of different design programs that I'm sure you're very familiar with. But having that experience, having that knowledge of that is a leg up from maybe some of the existing design teams that have worked for many of the brands that have been, that are much more mature. And fresh looks are critical, especially at this time. And we're seeing that trend, like I said, of brick and mortar, especially in the department store arena, really start to increase. And it's an interesting trend because the direct-to-consumer for those stores has actually been reduced over the last couple of months. And it's just happening because of COVID, basically, hopefully fading away.
I'm going to try to connect the dots to why we call this You Are the Brand, because you are going to be the brand. Just as we've built our careers becoming our own brand, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. How many of you have been on interviews? About a third. How many of you have written a resume? And how many of you know where you want to look for a job? Okay, so the process of looking for a job is not easy. And what's very important is this resume thing is greatly overrated because you're young and your experience is somewhat limited. So part of a resume is a personal statement. And Michael, why don't you talk about what you like to look at when you look at a resume or your clients look at resumes?
Well, number one, you want to be sort of truthful on the resume because the hurdle
Just
in
sort
getting
of.
into what's that?
Just sort of.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. Because you really, because they're going to vet you through the HR department, and they're going to do a sort of a background. So you really you don't want to have that as an obstacle of moving forward, with the interview process. But I think in most cases, if you haven't had like a lot of prior work experience, is to try to condense the resume and have it on one piece of paper. You're going to highlight your educational experience. You may have some internships and really what you did in the internships. But I think the key is the getting in the door and having a face-to-face, getting through the HR department and getting to a decision maker. And I think that's the goal. And also, it's very daunting and it's very stressful and it's very discouraging to be told, no, we're not interested, blah, blah, blah. But I think no means not now. I think it's very difficult to get in, but I think COVID, Andrew mentioned, the dilemma with COVID, but COVID really created a lot of trauma and was very Darwinian, and it cleared out a lot of brands, companies that probably shouldn't have been in business to begin with, and it opened up new economies, new verticals for you to look at. I think, frankly, as a younger person starting out, I think COVID, even though it was painful for all of us, gives you more opportunities that you otherwise had. And I think it's fantastic in that respect.
To add to the resume point, I think it's super important to be honest and truthful with your resume, but I also think it's your one time that you can be a bit boastful. And, I know a lot of people that I've helped work with on their resumes, they feel like they sound too braggy with their bullet points, but this is a point where you want to put your best foot forward and really shine with all your skills that you do personally have and you do personally shine on, and not be too concerned about sounding modest, because that is a place where, they're picking you out of a stack of papers and you want to make sure that you get your foot in the door so that you can show them how awesome you are in person.
As you embark upon your search, one of the things that's important is writing a great cover letter, directing it to somebody who you think will make a difference in reading it. And when you do that cover letter, show it to somebody else to read it, make certain it says what you want it to say, and very explicitly. More often than not, as you start your career, that cover letter talks about your enthusiasm, your education, your ability to take a chance and make a difference in somebody's company.
And that cover letter can be in many forms. It can be in a video. It can be in an audio video. It can be as part of a portfolio. It needs to pop. It needs to, you need to be able to you should do your homework of the companies if you're targeting a specific company that you feel you can be a major contributor to. Do your homework, do that research, and basically see how you can make a difference, whether it be in the designs that you have or whether it be in the personality that you could bring to that company or the work ethic that you could bring. That's what the interviewer wants to see.
It's a little misleading because everyone always says, do you have your resume ready, as if it's a singular thing? But I think every time you're applying to a job, you should tweak that resume for that specific job, pulling out buzzwords that they've maybe listed in their job description of what they're actually looking for that do hit your skill sets exactly. You pull it out in your cover letter to make sure you're highlighting it, but you also want to make sure it's in the bullets of your resume, because if you have those skills but it's not necessarily as clear on your resume, they might miss it when they're looking through their stack.
Yeah, the other thing I want to mention is that it's perfectly fine if you are looking for a specific job with a company or institution to modify that resume to fit that job. And there's so much information, particularly if you're interviewing with call it a public company, G3 you mentioned, prior employee.
Yeah.
There's so much data. There's the public, reports, all the information that you could glean. And the more information you know about that company and to discuss that on your initial interview, I think is fantastic. And you
Definitely.
can get it
Yeah.
today. And,
Yeah.
and even if you know somebody who's been at a company, who's at the company, who can assist you in that endeavor, there's absolutely, it's perfectly fine. And again, I always mention it's always through the agency of others, and you should always invariably take advantage of that.
I want to go back to what Michael just said. It's very important. Now that you've gotten your resume out there, you have an interview. Not only are you being interviewed, you're asking questions to the person across the table or on the other side of an email. It's very important for you to be able to ask the questions and anticipate some questions that they're going to ask of you. So do your research. Understand not only the company, but maybe its competition or the niche of what business it's in. Because that's when you're on stage. That's when you're the brand trying to get yourself in the right position.
And and I'm sure many of you have had either Zoom or Microsoft Team interviews. You need to practice. We've had monthly meetings, and we have one or two members who are not on the meeting; they're just on the phone. It doesn't work. Or a couple of them pick a background that is a phony background.
I won't do it again.
Did anyone ever show up as a cat
That
on
could
your
be great. It could be. You have. You have
Golden
palm trees
Parade.
behind.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, whenever we have the meetings, you have a real background that you're really in Palm Beach. So,
Yeah.
so.
That sounds nice.
But I think that's very important, because those subtle issues, if you are having an interview like that, choosing your background says a lot about the person who's being interviewed. Also, your social media feeds, you need to be very careful. I remember that when my daughter was going to interviews, the last thing, you need to do is to put on Facebook some of your high school or college antics. So just
Yeah.
be careful.
Stay with
they
you.
will check, and they will also invariably, they're going to do a background. And if you did have a little faux pas that, I'm not embarrassed to say, I've always, back in college, all right, you get a little rambunctious, what have you, when the police showed up. You want to really, you got to be, they're going to find it, okay? And they will, because it's out there. But I think the two best questions, if you do make it to the interview and to get to the decision maker, is number one, of course, have all this information about the company. Ask them what do they foresee as the challenges going forward. And I think that's a very mindful question. And also, you could ask them, what are the three best characteristics of the person they're looking for that particular job? And they'll tell you. Now, then you're going to modify your response, to fit that question. Yeah.
Before we move on to this, my wife was a former teacher, and her students used to always ask, does spelling count? Spelling counts when you write your resume. Make sure you spell check, because what you don't want to have somebody do is send you back a red note saying, you spelled your name wrong. So, please.
It's a little stuff. I actually want to ask, we're talking about getting a job, but talking about a lot of designers out here who maybe are going to be looking for funding at some point. What is it that you look for in a company when you give them the green light and you want to work for them?
So we look at a couple of different characteristics. You want to make sure there's sufficient capitalization in the business to make it economically sustainable, right? Most companies fail. It's not because they don't have momentum, they don't have demand, they don't have an order backlog. They don't have sufficient capital, and they just run out of gas. That's what happens. You want to see what the brand looks like, who they're selling to, what their, if there is performance, what their prior performance. It doesn't necessarily mean they're at that juncture making money, because you need to get the top line up, you need to get the momentum up and the cadence up before they get to a certain threshold to break even and go into a profitable stage. So we look at all that and any information, and also the background of the principals, had they had successes or had they had failures in the past. It's all very meaningful to us.
Yeah.
Early on, we mentioned something called collecting people. All through your career, you're going to collect people, and some of the most important people to collect are your accountant, your banker, somebody that understands logistics, of course, your customers. And it's very important to embrace your customers. Get to know who you really sell, because that's the key to your business. And it's the key to your interview also, to understand the company's customers. So do a good job at that. Do the investigation, put the work in, and you'll get a good result. Mike?
I can't agree more, Andy.
That's great. Well, I know we have a lot of questions out there, so we can, unless you feel like you have any more specific ones you want to.
I think the only last thing is,
Yeah.
most of the famous designers that you all know or think you know didn't start as designers. Many of them started as a cutter or in sales and wound up doing something else. So if you look at some of the famous stars that you'll know, whether it be Tommy Hilfiger